So dear course participants, we have seen the talk by Dr. Ramesh A Vaidya at the Power Summit 2019, in which he's referred to a range of questions around cross-border energy trade CBET. And here we have Dr. Vaidya with us as an update. It's now May 2020, so approximately 7-8 months after that talk, which you've already seen. And he has agreed very kindly to update us on some further thoughts on that. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Vaidya.
Thank you, Chris, for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts further. Well, when we talked about the cross-border electricity trade, the centralized power generation system underpins the discussions we had on cross-border energy trade. But in the context of sustainable mountain development, the decentralized generation and distribution system is just as important. As we have seen in the case of Myanmar, where 48% of the electricity supply is from decentralized off-grid system. In Nepal, it is 23%. In Pakistan, micro-hydropower plants are very popular. So in that context, and the optimal mix of centralized grid and decentralized off-grid solutions can lead to good returns for people and the environment in the future. So I would like to share some of my thoughts on what is happening on this decentralized power systems in the HKH region, specifically with examples from Nepal. First of all, if we look at this table, now this is very excellent research based on survey done by Pinto et al. And published by the World Bank very recently. It shows that the mini-grids provide about 12% of the service, and 11% is from standard-alone solar systems and 72% from the grid. So the mix is like 72, within that proportion, the mix is like 74, 26, about 74% from the grid and about 26% from the off-grid. Or let's say more like 3/4 to 1/4. But now where did we stand in 2014? In 2014, the mix was like 65-35. 65% was provided by the grid and 35% by the off-grid. Now at 65 has gone up to about 74-75 as far as grid is concerned, and that 35 from the off-grid has come down to around 24-25. So then the question that came up is why the contribution of off-grid systems is declining, especially in the context of mini-grids. And then it has been found by another study done by the World Bank around just before the earthquake. So this we cannot attribute this to the earthquake. Just before the earthquake, they found that about 90 of the 1,400 micro hydropower systems, there was some encroachment from the grid. So at that point of time, there are 1,400 micro hydro systems they surveyed, and out of that, for 90, there was encroachment because of grid extension. That is around 6%. And in terms of the power capacity, that was about 11% of the total power capacity of the micro hydropower systems. And at that time, it was 25 megawatt. So then the question that comes up now is, what can we do in this context where grid extension encroaches on the mini grids and ultimately, ends up in a situation where they have to close down? So there has been two solutions that has been coming up recently in Nepal. One is it possible to connect some of these micro hydropower plants in the mini grids to the central grid? So that there has been some progress in it. In January 2018, the first micro hydropower plant was connected to the grid. And then since then, 3 more have been connected. So far, 4 mini grids have been connected to the grid and 24 are in the waiting. So that's one direction it is moving. The second one is the Nepal government is trying to build more mini grids as opposed to more mini hydropower plants as opposed to micro hydropower plants. By that I mean micro hydropower plants are those with capacity less than 100 kilowatts, and mini hydropower plants have capacity up to 1 megawatt. as a result, it's much easier for these mini grids now to be connected to the central grid. So that's one point I would like to share with you, in the sense, what is the current situation in Nepal as far as microgrids are concerned. As you see from the table, as we would expect, of course, mini grids are more important in the mountains than in the hills in terms of their contribution. And also, standalone systems are also important in both mountains as well as hills. Now, the second point I would like to share with you is what makes these mini grids cost competitive with grid-based solutions. In the sense, of course, as far as mountains are concerned, we know mini grids are important because of the transmission cost, because of the inaccessibility of the mountains, and because of the topography. But even in the plains, mini grids are quite competitive. The reason why that happens is, of course, in mountains, it's inaccessibility and the distance that matters. In the plains, it is the load shedding. It is the brownouts that matter. It is the cost of what they call non-stored energy. That's what makes mini grids competitive in the plains as well. Now, I would like to just share a little bit of results from one analysis that was done in Bihar, in India. It's in the plains, of course, in the Vaishali district of Bihar, with about 65,000 households in that Vaishali district. And this group, from the lab of Ignatius Perez Oriega, professor at MIT and IIT Comillas in Spain, what they did is they looked at the comparison of what is the financial cost versus what is the non-stored energy cost for mini grids versus grid extensions. And they found out that as far as the financial cost is concerned, of course, as you expected, the mini grids are 3 times more expensive as the grid extensions. But as far as the non-stored energy cost is concerned, which is the cost incurred when service is not available to you, as if like during the blackouts and during load shedding, when that happens, now that cost is about 4 times as high for grid extensions in Vaishali district, they expected, as opposed to mini grids. And so ultimately they found out that grid extensions are about 8% more expensive than mini grids. And they came up with a solution, a mix of 58% mini grids in the Vaishali district, 35% grid extensions, and 7% standalone systems. So the point is, the reason why often we need mini grids is not only just because the transmission lines have to be extended, but also even in a fairly densely populated area, when there is enough capacity in the grid to serve the population at a time when they need electricity, then mini grids often they do better. Now this takes now into the third point that I would like to make, why there is a possibility now of what I would call a distributed generation system. In the sense, these are the mini grids, these are decentralized systems, but these are ultimately connected to the central grid. And that is the direction Nepal is going right now in one of the studies that I have seen published by the Planning Commission and the Nepal Electricity Authority. What they did is, this was published in 2018, they looked at 753 local units of the federal government of Nepal. And within those local units, they try to identify whether a hydropower mini grid or a solar mini grid or a biomass mini grid would be appropriate. And they found out that for the 221 of those units, hydropower plants made sense. For 481 solar PV plants made sense. For 50 biomass plants made sense, and for 1, the wind. And for 2 of the provinces, they also, and now these are pretty big mini grids. You know, each of them have a capacity about somewhere between 500 kilowatt to 1 megawatt, as opposed to micro hydropower plants, which have capacity less than 100 kilowatt. So also based on the current research done by Bhattacharya and others, now these, once you reach that level of 1 megawatt, it's much easier to connect with the central grid when the right time comes. And that data they also analyzed in 2 cases, in province 1 and province 2 of Nepal. And they found that for those cases, it made sense to connect these mini grids ultimately with the central grid. And that is the kind of analysis that we are seeing right now. Of course, it is very much follows from the kind of analysis that was done by this group at MIT and IIT Comillas in Spain. So finally, the question that comes to our mind then is, what kind of governance structure would we need now as we move into this much bigger mini grids? You know, we have been doing with the micro hydros, 100 kilowatt. Now we are talking of 1 megawatt, 1000 kilowatt. First of all, we have to move from the community-based systems that we have right now in Nepal to more private sector operated systems. And that would mean we have to develop the credit markets for the private sector to get the loan. And these grids have to be standardized, the mini grids, so that they could be ultimately connected with the central grids. And also there has to be some regulation that says to that point that when the central grid gets to a certain locality, what will happen to the mini grid that is already existing there? Will they get a compensation? Will they be interconnected? What kind of option they would have? So there will be need for regulation, there will be need for standards, and there will be need for credit markets for this transition to take place. So ultimately it looks like the direction we are heading in the HKH area, now just coming back to HKH again, is in the case of mountains, it seems that what really will ultimately make sense are these off-grid solutions with an appropriate mix of hydro and solar. And in the case of hills and plains, it will be this distributed generation systems, the mini grids, which will ultimately be connected with the central grid. But these are some research questions we have to do more research on. And to that extent, the kind of work that has been done by this Universal Energy Access Lab at MIT and IIT Comillas in Spain, that could be pretty useful. The World Bank, I understand, has already started using some of these models for analysis in a number of African countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you so much for giving me this time. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't join interactively with our participants, but because of the time zone that I'm in right now, but I hope these thoughts will be useful to you and motivate you to do further research to find a balance between grid and off-grid systems. Again, ICIMOD, of course, will have a very interesting role to play, I hope, both in cross-border electricity trade, as Chris indicated earlier, and also now in the decentralized systems, where we have the REACH program, a new program at ICIMOD right now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Vaidya.